to Tutor Couture. My name is Deborah and I'm going to show you how you drape or model a basic bodice block on the dress stand. So we're going to be working with calico because it's a fairly structured bodice and you therefore want something that's got a bit of oomph in it, otherwise it's just going to be too floppy. You need a piece of cloth that goes from the top of the stand to well below the waistline tape. And this is roughly 22 inches by 14.5. It needs to come round the side of the stand sufficiently to come past the side seam tape, which is under here, it's there, to allow for cutting in and for seam allowances and all of that sort of thing. The calico you now have to take across to a flat surface to draw on your straight grain. I'm now across at the ironing board and I have pressed this piece of calico. You can't work with a piece of creased cloth. So I'm now going to mark in the centre front and grain straight down. And I'm just taking an arbitrary quantity in of 4 centimetres. It doesn't have to be that. It just gives you a reasonable amount of material to work with as you're positioning it down the centre front. And I will mark that as centre front and straight grain. So you've now got your marked bit of calico. Offer it up to the stand and pin the top of the bit of raw edge of calico right at the top of the neck. The first 2 marks that you are putting down the centre front are the base of the neck and the middle of the bust. And it is at this point that you are going to have to take this bit of calico on and off the stand a couple of times, because you've got to put horizontal lines across to mark the bust line all the way across this entire piece of calico to keep it parallel to the floor. And this particular mark is vital to get it right. So we're going to have a mark at the base of the neck here and another one in the middle of the bust, and then take it off the stand and ruler a straight line across the whole piece of cloth, which I shall now demonstrate.
Lesson 1, 4.
At the top line, this little tiny mark here, which is the base of neck, square your ruler up to your centre front line. When I'm talking about squaring up, I'm referring to right angles. So you are creating a right angle between your straight grain, which is the long line you've run down the length of your piece of calico, and this first mark across here. And this first mark only needs to be 3 centimetres, about 1.25 inches long. It doesn't have to be massive, it's just there for a purpose that will become evident in a minute. Come down to the next one, which is your bust line balancing mark. And this one you draw right across the whole piece of cloth. So that's the line. I'll join it up in a minute. Having marked up the short base of neckline and the one that goes right across the piece of fabric that is your bust line, you can then offer it back up to the stand properly. So you pin it at the top, pin in the base of the neck, and pin the centre front bust line. And then pin across to the bust point. And secure that with a pin. And that's the first stage of preparing to model or drape your block. You can actually at this stage also continue straight down the centre front and put the centre front waist pin in. And I really wish that this stand had a nice big fat metal base. It doesn't, it's got tripod legs and she keeps wobbling. So I can see I'll have to do the one-legged stance and hold her down. Now, at the top of the neck area, you can see you've got a lot of tension occurring here. And the idea is you've got to get rid of it. So I'm going to cut in here with shears, not right down to the base of the neck, because then you take your seam allowance away, but certainly a good 5 centimetres, 2 inches to start with. It's better to do it a little bit at a time. If you go slap happy with your scissors, you'll end up having to start again because it will go wrong. Believe you me, I've done it, so don't. The idea behind all this is to get something that looks very smooth across the chest area and over the bust. So you've got to get rid of all these stress lines that I mentioned briefly a minute or so ago. I'm going to come back to the neck area first and slash down with the scissors. About that much to start with, and then work further back and do another and make that one shorter because the fabric is climbing up around the neck, and if you cut it too far you'll be stuck, so don't. This one, the first one, needs to come down a bit further to relieve the tension, and you can see it's now beginning to sit flatter into the neck, and you can secure that with a pin. And I'm just going to put the scissors down and come on round to the shoulder line, smoothing the calico as you go, and secure with a pin at the neck. You can now start marking in the base of the neck and just do a short dashed line at this stage. We will square all this slot up later when it's flat on the table. So you've got up to the inside neck edge here by this pin, and you then draw down the shoulder line. Again, at this stage you can do a dashed line as far as the start of the vertical tape line that cuts straight down through the bust, which is also called the princess line seam, and temporarily put a pin in there just to stop it. Like that. Swing the rest of the bust line from the bust point round to the side seam, keeping it parallel to the base of the stand, the bottom of the stand, and that will throw a certain amount of material up over the princess line area above the bust point through here, which forms the shoulder dart. And then you pin the fabric together. You don't pin this into the stand. And the aim is to try and get it smooth, so it's lying flat across the top of the chest. And pin on down to within 2.5 or 1 inch of the bust point, And you're blending this out to nothing. So if you've still got too much of a lump of fabric, you've got to ease it out towards the armhole. So you've got a very clean line going out to nothing at the end of the dart. And that forms the shoulder dart of the block. Continue your pencil mark from this side of the dart down to the shoulder point and put a mark there at the end, like that. And then now we're going to mark either side of the shoulder dart, exactly the same method. Mark with a dashed line where you've pinned, and then fold the dart over and mark the other side. When you're doing this yourself, you're going to be working facing the stand, which is far easier than the way I'm doing it. This is really awkward, working virtually upside down. So that's marked in the shoulder dart. We're now going to put the waist dart in, which is almost naturally forming itself to run down the lower part of the princess line taped part of the stand behind. So mark the waistline across. You're not going to be able to very accurately mark lines like this on a stand. You've just got to get an idea of where they are going to go, and then you'll straighten them up on the flat afterwards. And allow the cloth to drop into the, it almost does it for you, to drop into that line of the dart. And exactly as you did for the shoulder dart, pin it away up to the bust. You're going to have more fabric here than you do up there because you're taking more cloth away. It's a smaller area here under the fullness of the bust. And again, you want the end of the dart to disappear off to nothing, 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch away. And then you bring the side of the fabric round towards the side seam and secure that with a pin. You can see once again that there's an area of stress here where it's puckering up, and you treat that exactly the same way as you did the neck by cutting in, which I'll show you shortly. Before I mark the rest of the waistline in, I'm going to cut up into the calico, which will release the tension. And excuse me, you can begin to see the shape of the basic bodice appearing. So exactly the same principle as you did here with marking the dart, you do the same for the bust waist dart, and come down that side to the ribbon and pencil in this side. So it's marked like that. Remember to keep your pencil sharp, and then you'll get a good line, a cleaner line, and then you can carry on the waist mark round the side seam like that. And at this point I can now trim some of this excess off, which will help the overall shape sit better. And just cut it off back round to the other end of the calico. And here, where there's still a little bit of tension, I can cut further up into that. If you have tension appearing in this area of the body, as you work up the side seam, you ease it back and take it stage by stage. Just smooth it back with the fingers and then pin in and pull back up and pin it away. You must keep this line parallel to the bust line ribbon underneath. If you find you've still got some stress happening back at the dart area, then take the dart in fractionally more. And again, you've got to smooth it over here, over this area of the bust to the underarm. Secure it with a pin. And as you've marked up all the other areas before, same thing, mark up the side seam to the underarm. And then you're marking round the underarm and back up to line up with the end of the shoulder point here. And I'm just going to put a pin in at the end there, temporary, before I trim some of the excess of this away. Right, you can cut some of this excess off the sides now, but leave a reasonable chunk because you'll ultimately be pinning the side seam of the back bodice to the front. And you can cut a bit off around the armhole as well. It'll also help the whole thing lie better, and you can get much more of a sense of what it's going to look like. And again, leave a reasonable chunk across above your dotted shoulder line. And while I'm at it, I'm going to reduce this as well. In preparation for putting the back section on and starting that, you need to move these pins, but put another row in first. So leaving this lot in, just put another row in about an inch from the first lot. And all this is doing is just releasing the side seam area of the front block so that you can access the side seam when you come to do the back block. Otherwise you're fighting with two bits of cloth. So just push it forward, and I probably would pin it back so that it stays out of the way. And you do the same for the shoulder. Just release those few pins, move that one down, and then you can flick I'm going to have to move the top pin of the dart and just move it down. If pins are getting in your way, just move them. So it's going to sit forward of the shoulder seam like that. I'm just going to trim off this little bit of fabric on the edge. Ignore this bit of writing. I'm just going to take it off so you don't get confused. And that is your front block.